Episode 4 Bragging Rights. This week I played against Chris O'Brien of the Lost Legion. Chris, you want to say hi and talk?
Hey, hello.
Talk a little bit about your history in the hobby and such?
Sure. I've been playing Warhammer for about 13 years. Up until around 2003, 2004 was the Boston GT that Games Workshop ran. And at that point, a group of us who've been playing together decided to form a club so that when we go to tournaments, we have a little bit of name recognition and we don't end up playing people that we've played for all the months before. So we've been playing on a club level since then, about 6 years now. I've been averaging about 3 grand tournaments a year and have about 6 armies, 3 of which I consider GT level. I just rotate between them year after year.
Cool. Well, for this game, we decided to play our standard 2,000 points. We both brought what we would consider kind of an all-comers GT list, and I think we were both aiming to comp somewhere decent. We'll talk more about comp scores and how we think our armies would have comped a little bit later in the episode after the battle report, so stay tuned for that. For my army, I brought my Ogres of Carnithage. I've been working on this army for quite a while. Actually, I started assembling it, I think, 2 years ago, and just started putting some paints on it about 6 months ago, and 2 weeks ago finished it up to the 2,000 point level, although I still have another 53 models to paint to bring it up to 2,400. The only thing I add to this is another scrap launcher, iron gut, and 50 Noblar. For the core hitty of my army, I brought a big unit of iron guts led by my tyrant. He's got a tenderizer and he's got the stubborn crown. He also has a charm shield. It's attached to his shoulder, which lets him discount the first hit on a 2+, and he's got +1 toughness from, I believe it's called Moss Eater. The banner on the iron guts is the Rune Maw, which deflects any spell on a 2+ to a nearby unit, and I was just hoping to run Noblars near there so that if they get hit by a big nasty spell or even one of the debuffs, I could just deflect it over to Noblars who I don't really care about. In the center of my army, I had a really big unit of bulls led by the BSB that were hoping to win things on combat res, and we're hoping to also get stubborn by the Butcher's spell, which gives them +1 toughness and stubborn. My Butcher is leading a unit of Lead Belchers, which I felt like the Butcher and the Lead Belchers both kind of serve the same role of range support and also a little bit of close combat goodness. I was also hoping to get stubborn off on this unit if I needed to. For more long-range support, I've got my scrap launcher here, which is a Schleich elephant, or Schleich. I don't know how it's pronounced. It's kind of a kid's toy, and then I added a bunch of green stuff to it for some rugs and some caps on the tusks, and I put a couple of Numidians up in the back there with a cannon. And more Numidians. I have some skirmishing Noblar trappers. I'm using Wargames Factory Numidians for this because the fluff of the army is kind of like the story of Carthage gone wrong. I wrote about it online. If you want to check it out on the Warhammer forum, it's under my army log. And I've got a unit of 3 Sandstriders right in front of them, which I use. Their counts as Yetis. I use the Ustabi models for that, obviously. And here's Chris's army.
Alright, so 2,000 points of Dark Elves for a competitive tournament environment. There's been a lot of talk about some of the big nasty spells and how they can wreck units in 8th edition. So with that in mind, I try to keep my unit size all pretty small, both to emphasize the MSU element of the army, and that they're going to rely more on wounds than on combat res. And if they do take a bunch of losses from Pit of Shades or Dwellers, it's not that big a loss in the end. So again, this is a fair number of units. Here's our characters. A level 4 sorceress there, she just has the Pendant of Calith and a Dispel Scroll. The guy on the right is a Master with Crimson Death for Strength 6, and the Armor of Darkness for a 1-up save. Very simple and to the point. And then you've got a Cauldron BSB, no Gifts of Cain on her. So fairly magic light, one of the obvious items, the pendant, but you want to be competitive, so if it's on her, it's less obnoxious than it is on a big fighty guy.
So what do you have? What are you using for a model for your level 4? You say War Gods?
Level 4 is a War Gods of Egyptus caster. It's done by Chris Fitzpatrick, who did the old Dark Elf line. I guess the like 6th and 7th edition figures. He sculpted those. He moved over to them. Yeah, exactly. She's a little bit larger than most of them, but she's a general, so she's going to be big. And the BSB is a converted 40k Wish Elf special character.
Oh, cool.
Okay, core troops. Lots of core troops, as you can see. In the centers, 20 spears, full command. No magic banner on them. 2 units of Harpies, 2 units of Dark Riders, standard 5 with musician and crossbows. Still harassment troops. Cavalry, of course. People don't like it in 8th edition, but you can't go wrong with fast cav, especially fast cav that shoots. The kind of different unit is the small unit of Corsairs, 15 of them with the Frenzy banner. They are the usual home for that Master I take, which gives him the extra combat punch, gives him 4 attacks at strength 6. And they run around the flanks and hopefully will smash into you there. Specials and rares. This, again, pretty standard. 13 Blackguard, standard musician, no strikes first banner, nothing special, just pure points. 6 Shades, no upgrades. 14 Witch Elves with standard and musician there. Again, no gifts or upgrades. And the Hydra. The Hydra is lucky to see the battle today because 2 days ago he took a header off my shelf, and the only parts that were left assembled were 1 torso and 2 legs. So over the past 48 hours he received some puttying, some green stuff, and some glue, and he was back in action for today.
Your shades are painted with white cloaks. Is that just because you have the really light colored basing? It's like camouflage?
They're a winter scheme for the majority of the army, so I figure since they're shades, they match in with the tundra. I had that scene from Red Dawn in mind when they're running across the field and the people pop up and start shooting. So it's that same effect. The shades could be staying down low and they would blend in with the ground until it's too late.
Gotcha. Well, for spells, I didn't have to roll anything because butchers naturally know the entire lore. I'll quickly go through basically what the spells do. You've got Remains in Play spells. One of them gives regen and MR2, one gives +1 strength, one gives +1 toughness and stubborn. Then you have a Force a Panic check on another unit, or a 2d6 strength 2 magic missile, and finally you have a spell that lets you regain a wound, which is important on Butcher because he's always doing wounds to himself.
And for me, level 4, she takes the lore of Shadow. Again, all you hear about basically is life and death as far as the lores go in the new edition, so I like to try out the other ones. Shadow is still really, really strong lore. The spells I got for it were Pit of Shades, going from left to right. The Penumbral Pendulum, which is like the dodge or get hit by a strength 10 hit one. The Mystifying Miasma, which reduces your ballistic skill, weapon skill, initiative, and movement by D3. And lastly, Withering, which will reduce the toughness on you by D3. So, you can see basically, Miasma lowers the stats for my troops to do better in combat, Withering makes it easier for me to hurt you, and the Pit of Shades and the Pendulum for doing the range damage.
Yeah, my army's pretty afraid of the Lore Shadow in general. So we rolled up our mission and we rolled Meeting Engagement. Just a quick recap of it. It's you choose diagonal deployment zones, and you don't deploy your whole army. You roll a d6 for each unit, and anyone that rolls a 1 doesn't deploy in the first turn. So I rolled and I won tableside, which I was a little bit upset about. I wanted him to win tableside because I wanted him to go first, and I wanted to play a defensive, reactive game. I really wanted to castle up where it was going to be effective and make it so that I was basically always able to either back up or try to look for flanks where I could. Unfortunately, I won tablesides. I had to deploy first. On top of that, I rolled for my units, and both my Iron Guts and my Lead Belchers started off the table. That was a pretty big problem for me because my Tyrant likes to go with my Iron Guts to make them stubborn, and my Butcher likes to go with the Lead Belchers to keep him safe and keep him in a spot where he can cast magic on more than one unit. Unfortunately, I had to bunker them all into that one unit of Bulls, and I thought if I deployed them more centrally, then they'd have to go in unsupported. The reason I deployed them down there in the corners because I wanted to come up a little bit with my reinforcements. In retrospect, I think it might have been a mistake. Maybe I should have gone centrally like I had originally hoped, but oh well, I didn't. During my scout deployment, I also put up my Numidians, which you can see there in the picture, about 12 inches away from his Dark Riders.
So here we go. The media engagement is at diagonal deployment, so the standard plan for my army would be to have Blackguard and Witches in the center with spears and Corsairs to either side, but the building kind of got in the way of that. So we kept the majority of it. You have the Cauldron there in the center, giving the boost stubbornness to the Witch Elves, and the BSB there for the Blackguard rerolls. Then over to the side we have the spears with the level 4. On the other side of the woods, the Corsairs and the Master. I try to keep those two units fairly close to each other. Harpies are out front to harass and get in people's way, and also kind of staying near the leadership bubble of level 4. The Dark Riders are off to the side, and they are about to vanguard and spread out. Most of Matt's army was over on the far side of the board, my left. So the Dark Riders, I figured, were going to go to the right, since I know I got reserves coming on, and I can get some side shooting on them while the rest of my army advances. I ended up losing my Hydra to reserves. Everybody else made it on the board.
And
so
here's a Vanguard movement too, right?
Yep, so then I Vanguard movement, I see me coming right either side of the forest to take some probably initial pot shots at the trappers there, because they can be very annoying if you let skirmishers run around your backside unnoticed.
You know, I'm just realizing right now, you couldn't have done this Vanguard movement because it brings you within 12 inches of my trappers.
That is true.
Cool. So the game ended here because Chris had to forfeit because he brought himself within 12 inches. Well,
serves me right.
Thanks for listening to another episode. We'll see you next week.
Later, guys.
No, just kidding. Yoink. We didn't notice it at the time. We played on. And also, I'll point out now, in a lot of these episodes, we miss rules just because we don't want to spend too much time looking at the rule book while we're playing. We're still getting used to 8th, and luckily we're able to learn a lot of lessons from these games and hopefully not repeat the same mistakes. And anyone who watches it, finding our mistakes helps you
learn from them.
Yeah, prevent them from happening to you.
In general, when I've used people with Vanguard, which I haven't done much since I've been playing Skaven mostly for this past year, being out on the flanks, you don't usually have to worry about anybody being too close to you. But in this case, the scouts, which can now go anywhere within 12 inches, which is a big handy thing, would have kept that from happening.
So, did you mention your shades?
Yes, my shades, I put them way in the back corner with the thought that they could go forward and do a little march blocking. I'm also aware that a unit of Lead Belchers and Iron Guts are coming onto the field from somewhere. So with them back there, I can maybe draw some of his attention towards them and away from the rest of my army. Because he also doesn't want to have a bunch of shades or skirmishers running around the backfield peppering things.
So I was getting ready for my first turn. I was going to move the Yeti through the marsh and move the rest of my guys around the sides of the marsh, but unfortunately Chris rolled 6 for the Seize the Initiative and took the first turn. This is 2 games in a row I've lost to Seize, which is pretty huge.
Which also makes my move with the Vanguard not as bad, because if by marching past them I could have roughly got where I was, but there you have it. As it was, when I did move, one of my Dark Riders failed their march block test, as you can see by the little markers there. So they had to shuffle forward just a little bit while the other Dark Riders moved around behind the shades. We have the Harpies fanning out on the side so that they can jump in front of a unit or work their way around behind. And the rest of the Dark Elves just move up slowly because Ogres charge a fair distance, and I want to whittle those guys down before they get in close to me.